In this video, we're going to talk about the concept of non-compete agreements and how to avoid falling into legal problems when you're hiring an employee or personnel that are subject to a non-compete agreement with a prior employer. The first thing to note is that while many people think non-compete agreements are entirely unenforceable because you can't take away someone's livelihood to work, the truth is that in most states outside of California, courts will uphold non-compete agreements if they're narrowly tailored to serve the legitimate business interests of the prior employer. The rationale behind non-compete agreements and the legitimate business interests in enforcing a non-compete agreement is that someone that's subject to your sensitive business or technical information theoretically can't go and work for someone that's competitive to you and not inherently or inevitably use your trade secret information during the course of their work for the new party, and that's just not fair. So courts will look at a couple things in deciding whether a non-compete agreement is narrowly tailored to serve the legitimate business interests of the prior employer, and that is the length of time that a non-compete agreement is in effect. Generally, 1 or 2 years is deemed to be reasonable, although that really depends upon the particular facts and circumstances. Sometimes you'll see non-compete agreements as long as 3 years. They'll also see if the non-compete agreement is limited to working for a new employer that's in direct competition with the prior employer. And sometimes non-compete agreements need to be limited to a particular geography or a particular business segment in order to be reasonable and therefore enforceable. You should also be aware of the concept called blue penciling. Some states will say that even if a non-compete agreement on its face is written to be too broad and therefore unenforceable, if what the moving employee is actually doing would fall within the scope of a narrowly tailored, reasonable non-compete agreement, then the courts will blue pencil or rewrite the non-compete provision such that it's reasonable and covers the moving employee's conduct. So non-compete agreements can be enforceable if they're narrowly written, or if the activity of the employee moving from one employer to another would fall within the scope of a narrowly tailored non-compete provision. That would mean close in time to the employment with the original employer and moving to a new employer that's directly in competition with the prior employer. So if you're seeking to hire a new employee and they're coming from a prior employer or have recently worked for someone else, you need to check to see if they're subject to a non-compete provision. Because while that non-compete contract is a contract between the employee and the prior employer, a new employer, your technology startup, could also get in trouble under the law because you could be deemed to be interfering with that contractual relationship. So this is something that's worth checking into, and if in doubt, consulting legal counsel. And that's a general overview of non-compete provisions and how to avoid problems with them when you're a technology startup.